How does a band create something so viscerally powerful that it transcends the very genre it helped define, leaving behind every pretension and empty virtuosity that plagued progressive rock in the mid-70s, while simultaneously delivering the most sophisticated and architecturally perfect statement of their career? King Crimson's Red from 1974 answers this question not through the bloated excess that was drowning the genre at the time, but through brutal economy, structural precision, and an almost violent commitment to emotional truth. This is the album where Robert Fripp looked at the corpse of progressive rock and decided to perform an autopsy with surgical instruments while the patient was still twitching. The first thing that strikes any listener with functioning ears is the sheer sonic brutality of this record. When that opening riff of the title track hits, it doesn't invite you into some fantastical landscape populated by wizards and hobbits. It punches you directly in the solar plexus and asks if you're prepared for what comes next. John Wetton's bass doesn't merely support the harmonic structure. It becomes a weapon of mass destruction, carved from granite and deployed with militaristic precision. The tone he achieves throughout this record remains one of the most distinctive and muscular bass sounds ever committed to tape. Listen to how he navigates the descending chromatic lines in the verses of Red. Each note has the weight and impact of a sledgehammer, yet there's nothing clumsy about his execution. The control required to maintain that level of aggression while preserving perfect intonation and rhythmic accuracy speaks to a player operating at the absolute peak of technical mastery. The bass guitar on this album functions as far more than a rhythm section instrument. Wetton approaches his parts with the sensibility of a lead player, crafting lines that contain melodic interest and harmonic sophistication while maintaining their foundational role. His use of the lower register exploits the natural resonance of the instrument, creating overtones that add richness and complexity to the overall sound. The attack he employs varies throughout the album, sometimes using a pick for percussive clarity, other times utilizing fingerstyle technique for a rounder, more sustained tone. This variety in approach demonstrates not just technical versatility, but also a deep understanding of how different timbres serve different compositional needs. The way his bass interacts with Bruford's kick drum creates a rhythmic foundation that's simultaneously rock-solid and dynamically flexible, capable of shifting gears without losing momentum. Bill Bruford's drumming on this record deserves examination under a microscope, because what he accomplishes here fundamentally changed the vocabulary of rock percussion. Coming from Yes, where his playing was already remarkably sophisticated, Bruford strips away every unnecessary flourish and delivers performances of such stark efficiency that each strike of the drum feels inevitable and irreversible. The pattern he establishes in the opening measures of Red demonstrates his genius for creating maximum tension with minimum motion. Those hi-hat figures that punctuate the main riff aren't flashy. They're absolutely perfect. The choice of ride cymbal versus crash, the specific placement of the snare accents, the way he uses silence as effectively as sound, creates a rhythmic landscape that feels both mathematically precise and utterly organic. His work throughout Fallen Angel showcases his ability to shift between straight time and implied polyrhythms without ever losing the essential pulse that drives the composition forward. Lesser drummers would have cluttered these arrangements with unnecessary fills and technical displays. Bruford understood that the power of this music came from restraint and from knowing exactly when to detonate a fill for maximum emotional impact. Bruford's cymbal work deserves particular attention because it reveals his sophisticated understanding of texture and timbre. The way he orchestrates his cymbal crashes, choosing specific sizes and placements within the kit, creates a palette of metallic colors that adds depth to the overall sonic picture. His ride cymbal patterns often work in rhythmic counterpoint to the bass and guitar, creating polyrhythmic implications without explicitly breaking into odd meters. This subtlety gives the music a sense of forward motion and complexity that engages the listener on multiple levels simultaneously. His ability to play what sounds like a simple pattern while implying multiple simultaneous subdivisions demonstrates the kind of internalized rhythmic sophistication that separates journeyman players from true masters. Robert Fripp's guitar work throughout Red represents perhaps the most focused and devastating application of his considerable abilities. gone are the lengthy improvisations that characterized earlier Crimson records. Every note serves the composition. His tone on this album is simultaneously crystalline and crushing, achieved through his characteristic approach to guitar electronics and his relentless pursuit of sonic clarity, even within dense distortion. The way he voices chords throughout this record reveals his deep understanding of harmonic tension and resolution. Take the chord progression that underpins the main theme of Red. These aren't your standard rock power chords. Fripp constructs voicings that incorporate dissonant intervals, creating a sense of unease and instability that never quite resolves. The tritones and minor ninths that pepper his harmonic choices give the music an edge that separates it from anything else happening in rock at that time. His lead work on One More Red Nightmare displays his ability to construct solos that function as fully realized melodic statements, rather than mere displays of technical facility. Each phrase connects logically to the next, building toward climactic moments that feel earned rather than imposed. The guitar tone Fripp achieves on this record represents a benchmark that guitarists continue chasing decades later. The clarity he maintains even under heavy distortion comes from his meticulous attention to the entire signal chain, from the guitar itself through every piece of electronics before the amplifier. His picking technique contributes significantly to this clarity, as his right-hand control ensures that each note speaks with authority and definition. The way he uses volume swells and dynamic variation creates dramatic contrast within individual passages, building from whisper-quiet moments to earth-shaking crescendos without ever sounding forced or artificial. His understanding of the guitar's harmonic series allows him to create feedback that functions as a musical element rather than mere noise, bending and shaping it to serve melodic and textural purposes. The compositional architecture of this album reveals itself through repeated listening. These aren't songs in any conventional sense. They're carefully constructed sonic edifices where every element exists in precise relationship to every other element. The title track operates as a kind of programmatic piece, moving through distinct sections that function almost like movements in a classical work. The opening establishes the primary thematic material with that devastating riff. The verses introduce the vocal melody, which works in counterpoint to the instrumental themes. The instrumental break doesn't just provide space for soloing, it develops the initial material through variation and reharmonization, exploring the implications of the opening ideas before returning to restate the themes with accumulated weight and meaning. This isn't jazz fusion masquerading as rock, and it isn't classical music dressed up with electric instruments. It's something genuinely new, a synthesis that honors its influences while remaining utterly distinctive. The formal structure of these compositions demonstrates an understanding of large-scale architecture that was virtually unprecedented in rock music. The way themes return in altered form, the manner in which harmonic areas are explored and then abandoned, only to reappear later with new significance, the careful pacing that builds tension and releases it at precisely calculated moments. All of this reveals compositional thinking that draws on centuries of Western musical tradition, while remaining firmly rooted in the rock idiom. The band manages to incorporate elements of sonata form, theme and variation, and rondo structure without ever sounding academic or divorced from the visceral impact that defines great rock music. Fallen Angel demonstrates the band's ability to work within more conventional song structures while maintaining their commitment to harmonic and rhythmic sophistication. The chord progression that supports Wetton's vocal melody incorporates modal mixture and chromatic voice leading that would sound perfectly at home in mid-century classical composition. Yet the overall effect remains viscerally rock and roll. The way the verse melody interacts with the bass line creates counterpoint that's both intellectually satisfying and emotionally direct. The instrumental interlude doesn't abandon the song's tonal center so much as it orbits around it, exploring related harmonic areas before returning home with a sense of inevitability. This kind of compositional thinking requires years of study and an internalized understanding of how harmony functions across multiple musical traditions. The lyrics Wetton delivers throughout the album deserve recognition for their directness and avoidance of the fantasy-based narratives that dominated progressive rock. The words deal with recognizably human experiences: anxiety, isolation, the search for meaning in an indifferent universe. They're delivered with such conviction that they transcend any potential pretension in their imagery. Wetton's vocal timbre carries a worn, world-weary quality that perfectly complements the music's combination of sophistication and raw power. His phrasing demonstrates an understanding of how vocals can function as another instrumental voice within the arrangement, rather than simply sitting on top of the music. One More Red Nightmare takes the template established in previous tracks and pushes it into even more unsettling territory. The opening bass riff establishes an odd meter that feels simultaneously awkward and absolutely right. Bruford's cymbal work throughout this track creates layers of rhythmic texture that complement rather than duplicate the primary pulse. When the main riff enters, it's built on a harmonic sequence that never quite settles, always implying resolution, but withholding it until the last possible moment. Wetton's vocal melody navigates this tricky harmonic terrain with remarkable assurance, finding melodic lines that clarify the underlying harmony while adding their own layer of complexity. The guitar solo section demonstrates Fripp's ability to construct solos that function as compositional development rather than mere displays. He takes fragments of the main theme and subjects them to variation, exploring different registers and textures while maintaining coherent melodic logic. The metric complexity of this track warrants deeper examination. The main riff exists in a meter that feels like it's constantly shifting, creating a sense of instability that perfectly matches the lyrical content. Bruford navigates these metric complexities with such assurance that the listener never feels lost, even when the downbeat placement defies expectation. The way the band handles transitions between different metric feels demonstrates the kind of ensemble cohesion that only comes from extensive rehearsal and shared musical vision. They make difficulty sound effortless, which paradoxically requires far more skill than making easy things sound difficult. Providence stands apart from the rest of the album as pure improvisation, a document of the band's ability to create coherent musical statements in real time without the safety net of predetermined structures. This track was recorded live on June 30th, 1974, in Providence, Rhode Island, during the band's final tour with violinist David Cross before his departure. This isn't random noodling or self-indulgent excess. It's four musicians operating with such a refined sense of ensemble communication that they can construct compelling musical architecture spontaneously. The way Fripp's guitar lines weave through Wetton's bass creates a contrapuntal texture that sounds composed even though it's entirely improvised. Cross's violin adds spectral colors to the improvisation, sometimes eerie and atmospheric, at other times engaging in dialogue with Fripp's guitar explorations. Bruford's choices about when to establish clear meter versus when to float freely demonstrate his deep musicality and his ability to respond in the moment to what his bandmates are creating. The arc of the piece builds naturally from sparse, exploratory beginnings through increasing density and intensity, toward a climax that feels structurally inevitable. This level of improvisational coherence requires not just technical mastery, but also a shared musical vocabulary and an almost telepathic level of communication between players. The inclusion of this improvisation on an otherwise carefully composed album serves multiple purposes. It demonstrates the band's ability to function as a cohesive unit, without predetermined structures, validating all the complex compositional material as coming from a place of genuine musical understanding, rather than merely learned patterns. It also provides a sonic palette cleansing between the compositional density of the earlier tracks and the emotional devastation of Starless. The textural exploration in Providence ranges from barely audible sustained tones to explosive bursts of energy, demonstrating the band's command of dynamics and their willingness to embrace silence and space as compositional elements. The track serves as David Cross's final recorded contribution to King Crimson, captured during what would be his last performances with the band before his dismissal. Starless functions as the album's emotional and structural apex, a composition of such breadth and depth that it stands among the greatest achievements in rock composition. The opening section establishes a mood of profound melancholy through minimal means. The introductory theme, Originally written for violin by David Cross during the band's earlier lineup but performed here by Fripp on guitar with subtle alterations, is heartbreaking in its simplicity and directness. Mel Collins's soprano saxophone adds layers of melancholic color to the texture. There's no technical showboating here, just perfectly crafted melodic lines that convey deep emotion with economy and grace. When Wetton's vocal enters, the melody he sings works in dialogue with the instrumental themes, creating a sense of conversation between voice and instruments. The lyrics eschew the fantasy narratives and science fiction conceits that dominated progressive rock in favor of something more immediate and human. The harmonic progression underlying this section uses modal interchange and chromatic voice, leading to create a sense of yearning and unresolved tension. The saxophone work in this opening section, provided by session musician Mel Collins on soprano, cannot be overstated. Collins plays with remarkable restraint, allowing long tones to sustain and decay naturally, creating space within the texture for the other instruments to breathe. The intervallic construction of the melodic material, the specific jumps between notes, creates a sense of longing that words could never capture. The tone is warm without being saccharine, achieving that difficult balance between emotional directness and musical sophistication. The way these themes are echoed and developed by the various instruments demonstrates the compositional unity that ties the entire piece together. Ian MacDonald's alto saxophone later joins during the explosive climax, adding an additional layer of instrumental conversation. The middle section of Starless introduces new rhythmic and harmonic ideas, while maintaining thematic connections to the opening. The way the piece builds through this section demonstrates sophisticated understanding of dramatic pacing. Each new element enters at precisely the right moment to maintain forward momentum without rushing toward the climax. The instrumental voices trade melodic ideas, developing and transforming the initial material. When the piece finally explodes into the climactic section, it's not a mere increase in volume and density. It's the logical culmination of everything that came before, the resolution of tensions that have been accumulating throughout the entire composition. The ostinato pattern that drives this section is hypnotic and relentless, creating a foundation over which Fripp unleashes one of the most intense and emotionally devastating guitar solos in rock history. This isn't virtuosity for its own sake. Every note serves the emotional and structural needs of the composition. The climactic section builds with such inevitable force that first-time listeners often report feeling physically overwhelmed by its intensity. The repetitive bass pattern functions as a kind of vortex, pulling the listener deeper into the emotional center of the piece. Fripp's solo doesn't simply sit on top of this foundation. It engages with it, sometimes working with the established harmony, sometimes pushing against it to create additional tension. The way he uses the entire range of the guitar, from low growling lines to piercing high notes, creates a sense of desperation and catharsis that few pieces of music in any genre have ever achieved. The production of Red deserves recognition as an integral element of the album's success. The sonic clarity achieved throughout the record allows each instrument to occupy its own space in the mix, while contributing to a cohesive whole. The bass tone has presence and definition that allows Wetton's intricate lines to be heard clearly, even during the densest passages. The drum sound is immediate and powerful without resorting to the artificial enhancement that marred so many 70s rock records. Fripp's guitar tone cuts through the mix with razor precision, maintaining clarity even during the most harmonically complex passages. The decision to avoid excessive reverb and delay keeps the sound dry and immediate, creating a sense of intimacy and directness that serves the emotional content of the music. The mixing decisions reveal an understanding that clarity serves power. By ensuring that every element remains distinct and audible, the production allows the full impact of the compositional complexity to register with the listener. The stereo imaging places instruments in specific locations within the soundstage, creating a three-dimensional listening experience that reveals new details with each repeated hearing. The dynamic range preserved on the record, the difference between the quietest and loudest passages, gives the music room to breathe and makes the explosive moments all the more impactful by contrast. The historical context in which Red appeared makes its achievement even more remarkable. By 1974, Progressive rock had largely devolved into a parody of itself. Bands were competing to see who could write the longest suites, who could incorporate the most time signature changes, who could demonstrate the most ostentatious technical facility. The music became about displaying cleverness, rather than communicating genuine emotion or exploring meaningful musical ideas. King Crimson, who had helped create the genre with their debut album 5 years earlier, responded not by trying to outprog the competition but by stripping away every bit of excess and pretension. Red is lean, muscular, and utterly focused. There's no fat on this record. No indulgent passages included merely to demonstrate technical ability. Every moment serves the larger compositional and emotional goals. The album also represents a definitive statement about what rock music could achieve when approached with genuine compositional rigor, and when the musicians involved possessed both the technical mastery and the emotional maturity to serve the music, rather than their own egos. This wasn't a group of kids showing off. This was a band of mature musicians at the absolute peak of their powers, channeling everything they had learned about their instruments and about composition into creating something that would endure. The fact that Red remains devastating and relevant 5 decades after its creation testifies to the depth and quality of the achievement. The influence of Red on subsequent generations of musicians has been profound and widespread. Countless metal bands have acknowledged the album's impact on their sound, recognizing in its heaviness and precision a template for how to create music that was both brutal and sophisticated. The marriage of technical complexity and raw power that Red demonstrates became a foundational concept for the entire progressive metal genre that emerged in the late 80s and 90s. Alternative rock bands in the 80s and 90s looked to Red as an example of how to maintain artistic integrity while creating music of genuine power and emotional impact. Even contemporary progressive metal bands who work with levels of technical complexity that would have been unimaginable in 1974 acknowledge Red as a foundational text, recognizing that the album's power comes not from complexity for its own sake, but from the perfect marriage of technical mastery and emotional truth. The album's influence extends beyond its immediate stylistic descendants. The approach to composition it demonstrates, the idea that complexity should serve emotion rather than existing for its own sake, has influenced musicians across multiple genres. The commitment to sonic clarity and the understanding that space and silence function as compositional elements have become touchstones for producers and engineers working in heavy music. The album proved that music could be both intellectually rigorous and viscerally powerful, that sophistication and aggression weren't opposed forces but complementary aspects of a unified artistic vision. What makes Red a masterpiece isn't any single element, but rather the way every aspect of the album works in perfect synchronization toward a unified artistic vision. The compositional sophistication serves the emotional content. The technical mastery is deployed in service of the compositions. The production choices support the musical ideas. The performances are simultaneously virtuosic and utterly committed to the ensemble. Nothing is wasted, nothing is excessive, nothing is included merely for show. This is music created by masters operating at their peak, and the result is an album that doesn't just stand as a high point in progressive rock, but as one of the greatest achievements in rock music, period. Red proves that intelligence and emotion aren't opposed forces, but complementary aspects of meaningful artistic expression, and that true mastery involves knowing not just what to play but what to leave out. The album stands as a rebuke to every band that mistook complexity for depth, technique for musicality, and length for substance. It demonstrates that the most powerful music comes from clarity of vision, commitment to craft, and the courage to strip away everything that doesn't serve the essential emotional core of the work.